The double doors of the Astoria Club opened with a hush of velvet against marble, revealing Victor Ellison. His name carried weight in Manhattan. An empire of investments, skyscrapers, and boardrooms whispered his influence. He was 60, though time had been kind to his silver hair, slicked back with ruthless precision. His bespoke gray suit clung perfectly to his lean frame, each detail an announcement of wealth that could silence a room. And silence it did. Forks paused mid-air. Diners leaned subtly toward one another, whispering in awe. The golden chandeliers dripping with crystal seemed to burn brighter as he crossed the floor. Victor didn't just enter the restaurant. He owned it in the way men of absolute control owned every space they touched. In the far corner, Emily Carter steadied her tray. Just 25, her uniform was neat, black dress, starched white collar apron tied too tightly around her waist, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. She was more than a waitress. She was a second-year law student at NYU balancing torts and contracts by day, double shifts by night. That morning, a letter had arrived from the hospital, its cold, clinical words still carved into her memory. Insurance will not cover the new treatment. Immediate payment required $8,200. The treatment her younger brother needed wasn't optional. Without it, his fragile lungs would falter, and Emily refused to let that happen. Tonight mattered. One good tip, one generous table could be the difference between another month of medicine or another month of fear. Her eyes flicked to Victor, now being ushered to the most exclusive booth, the one with sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline. Her pulse quickened. Of all the guests in the room, of all the tables to fall under her care, fate had placed him in her section. The billionaire whose fortune could pay for an entire wing of the hospital was about to be served by a woman counting every dollar to keep her brother alive. Two worlds, his built on billions, hers balanced on fragile tips. Emily squared her shoulders, willing her hands not to shake. She would survive tonight, as she had survived every other impossible shift. What she didn't know was that the collision of these two worlds would not end with humiliation. It would end with a comeback that shook the walls of the Astoria and left an indelible mark on every soul who witnessed it. The first hint lingered in the air, unspoken, yet heavy. His arrogance would meet a resistance he had never imagined. The Astoria's corner booth glowed under golden chandeliers, a seat of privilege reserved for those who didn't ask prices, only outcomes. Victor Ellison settled in with the authority of a man who had never once been told no. Beside him sat two younger associates, eager to bask in his shadow. Thomas and Grant dressed sharply, but lacking the quiet menace of their mentor. They leaned in whenever he spoke, laughing too loudly at his pointed comments, like pilot fish circling a shark. Emily approached the table with a steady smile, the tray balanced perfectly in her hands. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I start you off with—" Victor cut her off without looking up from his phone. "Water. Still. 3 cubes of ice. Not 2, not 4. 3. On the side. Don't hover." Thomas smirked. Grant chuckled under his breath. Emily's smile held, but inside her stomach tightened. She noted the order with quiet precision and moved away. The evening unfolded like a slow, unraveling thread. Each course became an opportunity for Victor to tighten his grip on the room. He swirled a $900 Bordeaux and frowned. Ruined, warm, amateur hour. The sommelier paled, swearing it was flawless, but Victor dismissed him with a flick of his hand. The steak arrived, seared to perfection. Victor sliced, once inspected the blush of pink, and sighed with the theatrics of a man who enjoyed disappointment. Cold in the middle. Typical. Every remark, every shake of his head was not about food. It was about control. Emily felt it with each step toward the booth. He wasn't critiquing dinner. He was dismantling dignity, one sneer at a time. When dessert plates were cleared Emily steadied her breath. This was the moment that mattered. The leather-bound check rested in her hands, like a fragile promise. $278. If tonight was generous, if the tip was even close to 20%, her brother's treatment could be within reach. Her chest tightened with nervous hope. She set the folder down gently on the table. "Thank you, gentlemen. I'll take this whenever you're ready." Victor let it sit. 10 minutes passed as he continued his conversation, ignoring the bill, as if it were an insect beneath his notice. Finally, with a sigh, meant to draw the room's attention, he opened it. His gray eyes scanned the total, his lip curling into a sneer. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his wallet. Not for a credit card, not for the crisp hundreds she expected, but for a single immaculate $1 bill. He placed it on the silver tray with theatrical care and then stood his coat draped effortlessly over his arm. The restaurant quieted, forks and knives halting midair. Conversations dwindled into silence. Victor's voice carried easily polished and cruel. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely toward Emily, "is what happens when you invest in nothing. When you reward incompetence. She's not service. She's not value. She's worthless." The word cut sharper than any knife. Emily's lungs seized, her throat burned. Around her, the dining room froze in collective shock. A sea of eyes fixed on the young waitress who had just been branded nothing. The manager, pale and sweating, rushed forward. "Mr. Ellison, please. Forgive any lapse. Of course the meal is on the house. There's no need to trouble yourself with the bill." His voice was syrupy, servile, eager to appease. Victor smirked, satisfied, and swept out with his entourage, leaving the dollar behind, like a mocking signature. Emily remained rooted to the floor, humiliation searing her skin. Whispers rippled through the room. Pity, curiosity, judgment. Her tray trembled in her hands as the word echoed again and again inside her skull. Worthless. The locker room of the Astoria was nothing like the glittering dining hall. Gone were the chandeliers and hushed luxury. Here, fluorescent lights hummed harshly, bouncing off chipped linoleum and dented lockers. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and exhaustion. Emily stumbled inside her tray, clutched like a shield she no longer needed. She dropped it onto a bench, the clatter echoing through the empty room. Her knees gave out, and she sank into a hard plastic chair, her hands trembling. The crisp $1 bill sat in her palm, unbearably light, yet crushing. She stared at it, as if it were a verdict handed down by a merciless judge. A verdict of her worth. Victor's voice replayed in her head, each syllable venomous. Worthless. Her chest tightened. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the hospital letter she had folded and refolded so many times it was beginning to fray at the edges. She spread it across her lap. New treatment approved. Insurance will not cover. Immediate payment required $8,200. The words blurred through a film of tears. Her brother's face rose in her mind. Samuel, only 14, fighting cystic fibrosis with a bravery far beyond his years. She remembered the way he smiled, tubes in his nose, whispering, "Don't worry, Em. We'll get through this." But tonight that smile felt impossibly far away. Her throat closed, and the sobs came raw and uncontrollable. She pressed her forehead to the cold metal of a locker, the tears dripping onto the paper in her lap. She wept for Samuel, for her parents, who worked 2 jobs each, for herself, trapped between law books and double shifts, clinging to the hope that one day all this struggle would mean something. And yet, with a single word, a man who knew nothing of her battles had stripped her to nothing. Maybe he was right, a cruel whisper inside her said. Maybe you're not enough. For a few fleeting minutes, she believed it. She let the despair consume her, let the humiliation burn her alive. Then slowly something shifted. Her law training, the endless nights of study, The moot court victories, the contracts drafted with surgical precision, stirred within her. She remembered standing in a lecture hall debating the concept of implied contracts, her professor nodding in approval. She remembered Samuel's voice calling her his hero. And now, in this sterile locker room with a tear-streaked face and shaking hands, a fire kindled inside her. Victor Ellison thought he had ended her tonight. But in his arrogance, he had made one fatal mistake. He had chosen to humiliate not just a waitress, but a woman trained in the very language he used to diminish her law-value contract's worth. Emily lifted her head. Her eyes, still red from tears, now blazed with something fierce. She straightened her uniform, smoothed her apron, and caught her reflection in the mirror above the sinks. The girl who stared back was no longer the trembling server who had taken his insults in silence. She was a litigator in training, a fighter, a sister who refused to let her brother down. Her tears dried, her breath steadied. She tucked the dollar bill into her pocket, folded the hospital letter carefully, and stood tall. Tonight, she would not leave this building as a victim. Tonight, she would step back into that dining hall, not with tears, but with the one weapon Victor Ellison never expected, her voice. The dining hall of the Astoria had returned to its low hum, though a nervous tension still lingered in the air. Diners whispered about what they had just witnessed, the billionaire who humiliated a waitress with a $1 bill. Most expected her to vanish into the shadows, never to be seen again that night. But then the air shifted. Emily Carter stepped back into the room. Gone was the hunched posture, the tear-stained face. In her place stood a woman transformed. She moved with calm precision, her black and white uniform suddenly looking less like a symbol of servitude and more like the robes of a prosecutor. Her shoulders were square, her chin lifted, her eyes alight with a controlled fire. Every head turned. Forks paused once again. Even the chandeliers seemed to burn a little brighter. Victor Ellison and his 2 associates were still near the entrance, waiting for their coats. Their laughter drifted like smoke. But it died the moment Emily's voice rang out clear, steady, and carrying across the room. Mr. Ellison. He turned, irritation etched across his face. What is it now? Come to beg for the tip you didn't earn. The manager nearly leapt from his shoes. Emily, get back. She ignored him. Her focus was locked on Victor. No, sir, she said evenly. I've come to discuss the terms of our transaction. That word transaction caught his attention. His brow furrowed, curiosity flashing behind disdain. The associates smirked, eager for more entertainment. Diners leaned closer, sensing the spark of something extraordinary. Emily continued, her tone sharp and deliberate, each word delivered like evidence before jury. You ordered food. We provided it to standard. You consumed it in full. That forms an implied contract. By refusing to pay the service charge, you've breached that contract. Victor's smirk deepened. Your incompetence was the breach. Emily's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting like a scalpel. That's subjective, not material. Did I spill anything on you? Did I get your order wrong? Did I use offensive language? No. You accepted the product and the service without complaint until payment was due. Which means the breach, Mr. Ellison, is yours. A ripple of murmurs swept the room. Victor opened his mouth, but Emily didn't give him the chance. She pressed on, her words relentless, her confidence mounting. And then there's the matter of your public declaration. You didn't criticize my service. You labeled me personally as worthless. That in legal terms is slander per se. You harmed my reputation in front of dozens of witnesses. That damage is measurable. Tonight's tip could have covered medical expenses for my brother. Your words didn't just humiliate me. They caused financial harm. The restaurant fell utterly silent. Even the clink of glassware ceased. Victor's smirk faltered. A flush crept up his neck. His associates shifted uncomfortably. Emily's voice grew steadier, stronger. You wanted to lecture me on market value. Let's examine mine. I'm a second-year law student at NYU, top 10% of my class. The average starting salary for someone in my position at a top firm is $225,000 a year before bonuses. My lifetime earning potential is in the millions. This job. She gestured to her uniform. It's not a reflection of my worth. It's venture capital. Every tip is an investment in my future. She took one step closer, her eyes never leaving his. So no, Mr. Ellison. I am not worthless. I am an asset with returns you can't begin to measure. And tonight you didn't just stiff a waitress. You tried to bankrupt my dignity. The words hit like thunder. Victor's lips parted, but nothing came out. For the first time in memory, the man who had built empires with his tongue was speechless. The silence that followed was heavier than stone, yet electric. The balance of power in the room had shifted. The billionaire's dominance had cracked, and everyone knew it. For a long, breathless moment, the dining hall of the Astoria stood in silence. Emily Carter, the waitress, who had just been branded worthless, now towered in presence over the billionaire who had tried to crush her. Diners shifted in their seats, some wide-eyed with admiration, others quietly holding their breath. Victor Ellison's jaw tightened. He recovered enough composure to scoff, though his eyes betrayed the flicker of unease. A law student, he muttered, forcing a laugh. This is what passes for entertainment now. You think your textbooks give you the right to challenge me. The crowd bristled, unsure how to react. Emily stood unflinching, though her heart pounded. She had expected resistance. She had not expected what happened next. From the far end of the dining room, a calm, deliberate voice cut through the tension. They give her more than that, Victor. They give her the truth. Heads turned as an older man rose from a corner table. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier, his navy suit impeccable, yet understated. He walked with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention without demanding it. Diners murmured as recognition spread. Richard Wallace, senior partner at Wallace & Kane, one of the most powerful law firms in the nation. Emily's breath caught. She had studied his cases, admired his courtroom brilliance, even quoted his arguments in her moot court competitions. And now, here he was, walking toward her table, as if destiny itself had summoned him. Wallace stopped beside her, his gaze fixed on Victor. I've heard enough, he said evenly. Everything this young woman said is correct. She has articulated the principles of implied contract and defamation with remarkable precision. If she were already admitted to the bar, I'd offer her my card this very second. The room rippled with astonishment. Victor bristled, his face paling under the golden light. Richard, this is beneath you. Defending some waitress. Wallace's eyes hardened. Funny. Decades ago, you were the one who needed defending. Victor froze. Wallace turned to the room, his voice carrying with quiet authority. Many years ago, this man wasn't a titan of finance. He was a desperate young graduate with nothing but debt and a sharp mind. He was given a chance, an undeserved chance, by a mentor who saw potential where others saw nothing. Without that break, Victor Ellison would not own skyscrapers or hedge funds. He would not even afford a seat in this restaurant. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Diners leaned in, hungry for the revelation. Wallace's voice sharpened. And yet the man who was once saved has forgotten the lesson of grace. Instead of lifting others, he crushes them. Instead of gratitude, he chooses arrogance. That, Victor, is your true bankruptcy. Victor's mask cracked. Shame and fury warred across his face. His associates shifted uncomfortably, their smirks long gone. Emily stood rooted, her chest rising and falling, stunned that someone of Wallace's stature had stepped into her defense. The silence was thick, but no longer in Victor's favor. The diners who had once whispered in awe of his presence now whispered in condemnation. The tide had turned. Victor grabbed his coat, his voice hoarse. "This isn't over." But even he knew the lie rang hollow. He stormed toward the exit, his empire suddenly feeling fragile beneath the weight of a single truth. For the first time that evening, Emily felt the chains of humiliation break. Not because a powerful man had defended her, but because she had spoken first and been heard. The heavy doors of the Astoria closed behind Victor Ellison with a dull thud. But the weight of his downfall lingered in the room. For a long moment no one moved, as if waiting to see whether the silence would crack. Then slowly, the atmosphere shifted. Diners glanced at Emily, not with pity this time, but with quiet respect. Richard Wallace remained beside her, his posture calm but commanding, as though the courtroom had simply changed venue to a restaurant gilded with chandeliers. He turned not to Victor's abandoned table, but to Emily. "You spoke truth tonight," he said, his voice firm but warm. "Not because you rehearsed it, but because it came from a place of courage. That is rarer than you think in our profession." Emily's throat tightened. She opened her mouth to thank him, but Wallace continued pulling a sleek, gold-embossed card from his breast pocket. He held it out, the light catching on the engraved letters of his firm's name. "I don't offer this as charity," he said, making sure the entire room heard. "I offer it because you have proven yourself. Join our summer program. Learn what it means to stand your ground in rooms far larger than this one. We need voices like yours in the law." Emily's hand trembled as she reached for the card. The moment her fingers closed around it, the dam broke. Applause erupted, not polite, obligatory claps, but a wave of genuine admiration. Diners stood, some cheering, others nodding in solemn approval. Even the staff, long accustomed to swallowing their dignity in silence, clapped until their palms stung. At Victor's abandoned booth, his two associates scrambled to cover the bill, their faces pale. They added not just the meal total, but a stack of $100 bills as a tip, desperate to distance themselves from his disgrace. Emily barely noticed. For once, the weight of money didn't crush her, it lifted her. The manager approached, flustered, stammering apologies. Emily turned to him, her eyes steady. "Don't apologize to me," she said quietly. "Apologize to your staff the next time you forget we're human." His mouth opened, then closed. He nodded, chastened. Later that night, in the quiet of her small apartment, Emily sat at the worn wooden table where she had studied countless nights. The golden card from Wallace lay before her, gleaming under the warm desk lamp. Beside it rested the $1 bill, creased now, no longer a wound, but a keepsake. She picked it up between her fingers and smiled softly. Once it had felt like a verdict on her worth. Now it was a reminder she had refused to be defined by someone else's cruelty. She tucked the bill into her notebook, closing it with care, as if sealing away the past. In that moment, Emily Carter was no longer just a waitress balancing tips against medical bills. She was a woman who had claimed her voice, and with it, a future. Months later, the world outside Emily Carter's window had changed. She stood in her new office on the 54th floor of a glass tower that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Morning sunlight streamed through the wall of windows, gilding the city in gold. Below, the avenues pulsed with life, yellow taxis weaving horns, blaring New Yorkers striding with purpose. For the first time, she wasn't looking at that world from the outside. She was part of it. Her reflection in the glass startled her sometimes. Gone was the black and white waitress uniform, the tired smile, the aching feet. In its place was a tailored suit, crisp and professional, a badge of everything she had fought for. She traced her fingers over the smooth lapel and breathed in deeply. On her desk sat two objects, the gold-embossed card from Richard Wallace, now a symbol of mentorship and belief in the creased $1 bill. She kept them side by side, reminders of two men who had crossed her path, one who tried to reduce her to nothing, and one who helped her see what she already was. She opened her notebook, slipped the bill inside, and closed it with care. Not to hide it, but to honor it. That dollar no longer whispered worthless. It spoke louder, truths, resilience, courage, defiance. Emily's brother Samuel sat across from her, his cheeks rosy, his breathing steadier thanks to the treatments she could now afford. He leaned back in the chair, eyes wide, as he gazed out over the city. "You really work here?" he asked, all lacing his voice. Emily smiled. "We both do in a way. You kept me fighting Sam. Every long night, every insult, I thought of you." He grinned, the tubes gone from his nose at last. "Then we made it." Across the city, headlines whispered of Victor Ellison's decline. Clients pulled back, investors questioned his judgment, his associates distanced themselves. It wasn't the dollar that ruined him, it was the arrogance behind it. The empire he had built on intimidation cracked when the world saw that even a billionaire could be humbled by truth. But Emily didn't savor his fall. That wasn't the point. The lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about worth, the kind no one could measure in bank accounts or skyscrapers. Worth that came from standing tall when someone tried to push you down, from speaking truth, even when your voice trembled, from believing in your value when the world sneered otherwise. Emily Carter had once been called nothing, but she had turned that word into fuel, and it carried her to a place where her voice could no longer be silenced. As the camera of memory pulls back out of her office, past the skyline, over the sprawling city below, the narrator's voice softens, carrying the weight of her journey. True worth isn't measured in wealth or titles, but in integrity, resilience, and the courage to rise when someone calls you nothing. Sometimes the greatest fortunes are forged not in boardrooms, but in the fire of humiliation and the strength to defy it. A pause, gentle, lingering, an invitation, not a demand. If this story touched you, share it with someone who may need a reminder of their own worth. And if you'd like to hear more stories of resilience and justice, join us here. Subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and become part of a community that believes no one is ever truly worthless. The screen fades, the skyline glowing the story, leaving behind not bitterness, but quiet strength.